Ho ho. Holy crap, that movie was ridiculous. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and in case you couldn't tell by the t-shirt, I just got out of the theater watching the latest Santa Claus holiday ultra-violent rated R movie called Violent Night. And being that I've seen a lot of trailers and ads for this movie all over the internet, I wanted to get in as early as I could to check it out, so that way I could let you know whether or not it's going to be worth watching. So first things first, let me give you a quick plot summary about this movie. Violent Night takes place in the home of a very wealthy and dysfunctional family as a group of mercenaries led by John Leguizamo breaks in an attempt to steal the family fortune. Now, unfortunately, while they're there, they run into an unexpected guest in the form of Santa Claus. And this Santa Claus is not exactly the guy you've heard about in fairy tales. Now, Violent Night is directed by Wirkola, who you may or may not be familiar with, but what I think is a little more important than that is who the primary producer is on this movie. And that is one David Leitch. And David Leitch, of course, is mainly known as a director. He directed most recently Bullet Train with Brad Pitt, which I absolutely loved. He also directed Fast and Furious, Hobbs and Shaw. He directed Deadpool 2. And he was a writer and I believe an uncredited director on the original John Wick. And this movie absolutely has his DNA all over it. So let me tell you a few things that I really enjoyed about this movie, then I'll share the things that I didn't necessarily like, and then finally give you my overall thoughts on it. For one, right off the bat, the best thing about this movie, hands down, is David Harbour as Santa Claus. This role was made for him. If you saw him in the Black Widow movie playing, I believe, the Red Guardian, I think was his character's name, that character and this version of Santa Claus are so closely linked, it's ridiculous. He plays this sweet older man, but also this person with a very dark and violent past that you definitely don't want to mess with. You also have John Leguizamo, who plays the main bad guy. He goes by the codename Scrooge, and I gotta say, I love John Leguizamo. I feel like he just gets better and better with time, and I feel like he really got to chew up the scenery in a lot of the scenes in this movie. You also have a very young actress in Leah Brady who plays Trudy, who is the young girl that communicates with Santa Claus throughout the movie. And she is fantastic. She really brings kind of the heart and soul of the movie into it. So that way it doesn't just end up being a nonstop violent gore fest. It actually has a bit of heart and soul. And that's almost entirely because of her. Speaking of the action though, that is of course the primary focus of this movie, and it certainly falls under the pros. The action in this movie is insane and over the top and violent and gory, but not too gory to be very uncomfortable. There were a number of scenes in the theater where there was a gasp pretty much throughout the entire audience. And I would say a lot of it was certainly over the top, as you might expect, but it wasn't to a level where I had to turn away. And I'm generally not a big fan of like body horror. There were maybe two scenes in particular that I can think of that I was like, ooh, that is kind of gross and very clearly painful, but nothing too egregious for sure. But the action, the violence, all of that, very well done in this movie. But again, this movie had a balance between that over-the-top action and violence and some Christmas cheer and heart and family emotions and all that stuff. And I feel like it walked that line very well. I also really appreciated that they explore a little bit more into Santa Claus's story. It's not just a blank slate of, oh, this is a magical guy that shows up and delivers presents. They actually talk a little bit about his origin story, if you will, and I thought that was really cool. I feel like it adds a little more depth to the character and a little more reason for you to get invested into whether or not he's able to survive. Now, all of that being said, there were a couple of nitpicks, a couple of things that I didn't necessarily love about the movie, and I want to let you know what those are. Probably most importantly to me was the pacing. This movie's about an hour and 40 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes maybe, and honestly, it felt like it could have trimmed down just a few minutes. Maybe if you get it to that 90-minute mark, an hour and a half, trim off 10, 11 minutes, that would have helped it feel like it's moving along at a quicker pace, because there were a number of scenes where you would just be sitting around talking with some characters and it's not necessarily doing anything like building tension or expressing to you something that is going to be compelling you throughout the story. It really felt like they were just wasting time in a few moments, and that's not something you want to notice or feel when you're watching an action movie. Aside from that, another smaller but still a real gripe that I had with the movie is that most of the characters are entirely unlikable. There are just a couple characters throughout the entire movie that are likable at all, and everyone else is just kind of a terrible person. And because of that, because you have these people that are in this really dangerous situation, if they're terrible people, you don't really care if anything bad happens to them. And so that kind of took away some of the weight of the circumstances. Overall, though, I did really enjoy the movie. I love all of the subtle and some of the not so subtle nods to some other major Christmas movies. For example, Die Hard, of course, there are some nods to Die Hard. One a little more blatant than you might expect, but I loved it either way. And some other nods to even Home Alone, which was very satisfying. If you're somebody that likes Home Alone and grew up watching it, this answers some questions that you may have had about that movie. Truly, though, this most resembles Die Hard, I think. It almost feels as if the creators, the writers of this movie, got into an argument over whether or not Die Hard was officially a Christmas movie, which it is a Christmas movie, by the way. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments below. And it feels like they were debating that. And so instead of just having that argument, they said, well, why don't we just remake Die Hard except with Santa Claus? And that's pretty much exactly what they did. Now, of course, I don't think this is necessarily as good as Die Hard. Part of the problem with being a movie that is based off of another movie or that is chasing another movie is that you're not really going to be as good as the original. If simply for the fact that that was the original. That was the first time it was done. So anything you do is just going to be a copy of that. So no, it's not as good as Die Hard in my opinion, but it's still a really fun time. I would absolutely recommend checking out Violent Night. I will say this is a movie that you are best served watching with a group of friends, maybe after having a few drinks, and just have a good time. So those are my thoughts. Overall, a positive review for Violent Night. I don't think it's necessarily a movie that's going to change the game, but it is a really good time, especially something to watch with the homies, and I enjoyed checking it out. But if you've had a chance to watch Violent Night, definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to see more movie reviews just like this one, I also do ranking videos and trailer reactions. Make sure you subscribe. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.